Okay, so in this lecture and next few lectures, we will talk about gene knockout and gene knock-in in mouse and generation of genetically modified mouse in general. Okay, so uh, as you may know that in the year 2007, the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine went to this particular technology, and the pioneers of it, Professor Mario Capecchi and Professor Oliver Smiths and Sir Martin Evans, they received the Nobel Prize. I will tell you a little bit about their work. I will tell you the historical background and the other landmark discoveries that made this very critical technology to develop. Now, before I get any further, let me tell you what is a knockout mouse technology. So, I, I want you to understand very clearly that a gene is not knocked out in a mouse. Okay, a gene is not knocked out in a mouse. What is done instead is a gene is knocked out in a cell, and that cell is used to make the whole mouse. And obviously the cell that can make a whole animal is an embryonic stem cell. So I will introduce you to all these concepts slowly, but let me start with some background material. That whether it's a frog or a mouse or a human being or a plant or whatever it is, these are all made of cells, and each cell will have a nucleus, and within that there is DNA, which is the blueprint of our physiological behavior, or for any animals, right? Now, if you think of the human genome, the exact number is not known, but roughly 23,000 genes are our genome encodes roughly 23,000 genes. Now, it is the interaction of these 23,000 genes in a well-programmed manner that you see, like the human physiological outcome. Um, it is the genome that ensures that every offspring of a human being looks like a human being, every offspring of a mouse looks like a mouse, and so on and so forth. Now, therefore, therefore, it is obvious that the genes are what the critical elements that define who we are. Now, it is also true that the interaction of these, all the genes expressed by the genome is manifested in the entire organism. But if we want to know which gene is controlling what aspect of the physiology or behavior or any aspect of our existence, then we will have to go back to our original concept. That is, we need to turn off one gene at a time and see what is the functionality that is being missed. And then you know that that gene was perhaps responsible for that specific functionality. But this cannot be done. This you cannot play with genes in humans because it is extremely unethical. But at the same time, there are many diseases which were known from much before that are inherited. So it is most likely because there are genetic deficiencies in a particular human being because of which the human suffers. Like the image that I showed you for a few fleeting seconds, and you can see it in your lecture slides, is a disease called cleft palate. It's a very, very common uh, uh, a structural defect in human babies, and it is known that it's a genetic inherited disease. Now, if you want to know that which gene is mutated in these babies so that you can fix it, neither can you inactivate genes in human beings, nor can you fix genes in human beings. So you have to develop your ideas about first which gene or genes may or may not be involved in the process, like which genes may be involved in the process, and what is the kind of deficiency that is there in human genome that gives rise to the disease phenotype, and how can it be fixed. So you need a comprehensive understanding, and because this understanding cannot be done because these questions cannot be asked in humans, therefore we use all different kinds of animals which we call model organisms. Like this first line, these are all vertebrates: mouse, chick, frog, fish, nowadays rat, and some other animals as well. These are called model organisms for a reason. One, because these are vertebrates, they're considered fairly close to us evolutionarily. So if we understand the functioning of genes in these organisms, chances are that we will be able to extend it to human physiology quite easily. But that is, it's a little bit of a biased and limited argument, because when people study the function of genes in worm or fruit fly, those conclusions can also be easily extrapolated to humans. For that matter, even if you study gene function in yeast, most of the conclusions will be valid even for human genes as well. However, there are certain aspects of the human existence, like the body with bones and cartilages and the vasculature system, and like the entire complexity of the human organism, that those cannot be studied in worm or fruit fly, etc. From there you can get ideas about how a gene functions, but not necessarily how it impacts human physiology. Not that studying in mouse or chick will give you a very accurate answer, but fairly accurate answer. And sometimes we gather information from multiple different model organisms, and we surmise based on the outcome from all these different kinds of studies. So therefore, study of all sorts of model organisms are encouraged, and it should be done. Then only we will get to know properly how we function. And one aspect of life science research is certainly to help mankind overcome some of its difficulties, and that's how this becomes very, very useful. So not only uh, studying these model organisms genetically helps us understand how genes uh, function to in a particular organism, but also it can give us insight into how we can tackle certain pathological conditions. So now today I will talk primarily about how to generate knockout mouse. Okay, I will be very, very categorical here, and I would request that you also imbibe this terminology. Um, many people use the term transgenic mouse very loosely. Please understand that transgenic mouse is a completely different, has a completely different meaning for people in the field. Okay, so you should use the term knockout mouse, knock-in mouse, and you can use transgenic mouse when you really mean it. And what is a transgenic mouse? I will talk about it in another lecture. Okay, we will have 2 to 3 lectures on mouse transgenesis and knockout mouse, knock-in mouse, etc. So right now I will be talking primarily about knockout mouse technology. Okay, so the credit for developing the technologies for changing the genetic makeup of a cell goes to Mario Capecchi and Oliver Smiths. Okay, but how did they arrive at this? It was not that they did the whole thing. Like their work was built upon many landmark works, many of which won Nobel Prizes, like Joshua Lederberg's work, who won Nobel Prize in 1958 for reporting DNA recombination. Okay, so DNA recombination was studied, and the process was characterized, and everything was like a lot of information was uncovered by Joshua Lederberg. That is in 1958. Then Jim Watson, Francis Crick, and Maurice Wilkins, they got the Nobel Prize in 1962 for solving the DNA structure. Then Warner Arbour, Daniel Nathans, and Hamilton Smith got the Nobel Prize in 1978 for discovering restriction enzymes. And Paul Berg, Wally Gilbert, and Frederick Sanger got the Nobel Prize in 1980 for developing a DNA sequencing technique. Okay, so now you will see that how all these technologies were used by Mario Capecchi and Oliver Smiths to modify the genetic makeup of a cell. So imagine this red bar represents a segment of a chromosome. Okay? How do you know what is the sequence of the chromosome? So the contribution of both Watson and Crick, because they discovered the DNA structure, they described the DNA structure, and Sanger's method for doing the sequencing. That's how you get to know the sequence of the gene. And now imagine that within this you want to eliminate this part of the sequence. This is just I'm making it up just to make you understand things a little easy. So there comes Oliver, Hamilton Smith, and other scientists who discovered the restriction enzymes, right? So you can use a restriction enzyme to cut a piece of DNA into multiple pieces, and then Wise, who discovered DNA ligase. So you can take any other piece of DNA. This blue piece here is from some other source, and you can join this blue piece in between these two red pieces, and you can make a new kind of DNA. It is because of the discovery of DNA ligase, right? And then this is now a DNA which is different from the DNA that you started with, right? So this is a recombinant DNA, which we have learned in the previous lectures. You take this recombinant DNA and you introduce it inside of a cell which has the normal counterpart of the chromosome, right? Remember, this red part came from the chromosome. So that counterpart will be present in the cell, right? Like whichever cell it was, whether it was a mouse cell or a human cell, whatever it was. But we are focusing on mouse cells here, right? So it can be introduced in there, and if it is introduced in there, then there will be homologous recombination. And this was what was described by Joshua Lederberg, right? Now, this homologous recombination is there. So this is what Mario Capecchi and Oliver Smith is perfected between the year 1980 and 1989, where they could use the technology and the understanding developed by Joshua Lederberg and apply it on mouse cells to create mouse cells with altered genetic makeup. Um, Now, how would you do that? Like you can take this like this recombinant DNA, introduce it in the normal mouse cells, and this recombinant DNA will have an antibiotic marker, okay? Say neomycin resistance cassette that we talked about earlier. So if you you will attempt to transfect this piece of DNA into the normal cells. And some of the cells will take it up. I have schematically designed them as blue cells. And then if you grow them in the restricted media, like in the presence of G418, then only the transformed cells will survive and the rest of the cells will be dead. So this Mario Capecchi and Oliver Smith is demonstrated between 1980 and 1989. Parallelly, in UK, Sir Martin Evans, he developed the method for isolating stem cells. So what is a stem cell? So, just 101 on of developmental biology, that one sperm and one egg, they will fuse to produce the first cell of the new organism, in this case a mouse, which is called the zygote. Now this zygote will multiply in number, and there will be a stage, a typically 128 cell stage, meaning this zygote divided few times. Now it has 128 cells and it is covered in a sac, and it is called a blastocyst stage. It is called a blastocyst. So these are the cells that are of the blastocyst stage cells. Now these cells in the blastocyst stage, they are called embryonic stem cells or ES cells. The reason they are called ES cells is because they can give rise to any kind of cell or tissue type in a grown-up mouse. So whether it is the muscle or the bone or the neurons, whatever it is. So these experiments were also done that you can ablate some of the blastocyst cells, you can reduce the number of blastocyst cells, and you can still get the fully grown up mouse from there. So technically speaking, one embryonic stem cell can give rise to the entire mouse. Okay? Because it will again proliferate, the number of cells will go up, and then it will, technically speaking, I do not know if those experiments have been done, but certainly some cells were ablated from blastocyst, and then even then you got a normal mouse. So these cells, the cells in the blastocyst, if you can isolate them and culture them, then these cells can potentially be used to give rise to the entire animal. And Sir Martin Evans was able to do exactly that. He was able to isolate the embryonic stem cells in 1981. Now, if you combine his discovery of isolation and culturing of embryonic stem cells, you have to understand it very clearly that once you hear the go through the subsequent slides, it is very, very important that the yes cells stay as yes cells. During the culture, if they lose their stemness and they differentiate, then your ultimate objective of making a whole mouse out of any one of these yes cells will not be possible. Okay, so this was also developed by Martin Evans, that how to maintain the yes cells as yes cells in culture. Okay, so now you just think about Martin Evans's work and Mario Capecchi's work, and you combine them, then you can take in place of the other cells that Mario Capecchi and Oliver Smith has worked with, if you just work with yes cells and do the same homologous recombination, now suddenly you have an yes cell which has undergone modification of the genome at a specific location that was dictated by the stretch of DNA here and here. Wherever this sequence is found in the genome of these cells, that's where the homologous recombination will happen, and this blue part will be inserted in there. And this blue part can be just the neomycin resistance catalyst, or it can have something else. So this was the background of development of genetically modified mouse, or the knockout mouse technology. So Leo Capecchi, Martin Evans, and the successors like Alan Bradley, Liz Robertson, Gail Martin, they all independently achieved this they all independently achieved this feat of modifying embryonic stem cells in culture. Now you have embryonic stem cells that you have modified in the culture, right? Now you can imagine that you can introduce those embryonic stem cells through injection into a blastocyst, okay? And then what you have is, now you have a blastocyst that has the normal cells of the mouse parent and the genetically modified ES cells also present in the same blastocyst. Now a little bit more, let us go back to here first, that this is a particular mouse, here the far color is very, very important, the coat color, okay? I have not done these technologies myself, so I often tend to forget which one is which. But just for the sake of discussion, let us say that you use a mouse whose normal coat color is black, okay? And most of these mouse strains that we work with, they are maintained through brother-sister mating in the laboratory for years on, that we have discussed in the very first and second lectures, right? So these blastocyst cells, they are what they're supposed to be. And from this, you have this mouse, this is the embryo which grows up into this mouse, and then this mouse, if it is a male mouse, it will produce sperms, okay? And these sperms will have the same genetic characteristics that was present in these cells. Of course, these are diploid and these are haploid. But when you are mating, maintaining them as brother-sister mating for years on, then the genetic complement coming from the two parents are fairly identical. So they are homozygous in all the loci, other than the X and Y chromosome, of course, when it's a male. So now you have modified the blastocyst with embryonic stem cells which has undergone genetic modification, or genetic modification that you want, okay? So now it's a chimeric blastocyst. So because these cells will then come from a different mouse strain, which will have a different coat color, let's say black, okay? So these mice whose where we are trying to do the manipulation, whose blastocyst we are trying to manipulate, that is from white coat color, and these ES cells are from a mouse which has a black color. So now, if these cells will, as you know, that embryonic stem cells, they will contribute to the entire animal. So every cell type, every tissue type will be derived from one cell or the other. So some cell types, some tissue types will be derived from these blue cells as well. I'm not saying that that in a particular tissue only the blue cells will contribute. There can be contribution from both. That's why they are called chimera. But if they contribute to the coat color as well, we will get to see that there are these black stripes in an otherwise white mouse. So you know that you have generated the chimera, right? So now, so it only means that the modified embryonic stem cells contributed towards the development of the fully grown mice. Now, just because it has contributed to the coat color part, it is possible that it has contributed to many other tissue types, including the progenitors, the diploid progenitors, which will eventually give rise to the sperms. And if that's possible, and if that has happened, then the sperms produced from that particular chimeric mouse will, because remember sperms are haploid, right? So it is possible that they will, like if sperms are produced from these modified ES cells, then they will bear the genetically modified locus. Okay, so these sperms will bear the genetically modified locus. But it is always a question, like mouse geneticists will, like they have absolutely no control over it. They will wait with a lot of anxiety that did they get the modified ES cells to contribute to the sperms. It is referred to as the genetic modification going germline. Okay, so the colloquial term that we use is whether the mutation has gone germline. So that is not always a guaranteed thing. There are now methods that has increased the probability of a mutation going germline, but it is still not a perfect science. There is a lot of luck. But if it goes germline, then you will get the sperms that are genetically modified, right? So this is how actually it is done, that you take the ES cells from the culture, then you hold the blastocyst with a pipette, okay? So you apply very gentle vacuum. You do not do it manually. There is a very elaborate microscope associated apparatus in which you use, and then you use very fine glass needle. Okay, once you are in the campus, if you come to my lab, I can show you how these very fine glass needles are made. And then you have these blastocysts, and then you inject the modified ES cells into the blastocyst. Okay, you control it using joysticks while you are watching the whole thing under the microscope. Okay, now now once this sperm from the chimera, if it is bearing the genetically modified locus, then you cross that male again with a female, which is of the same original strain, that is the red colored strain that was schematically depicted in the previous slide. Then now for the particular genetic locus that you are interested in, it will be heterozygous, right? One copy that is coming from the female will have the normal red chromosome. The other copy that is coming from the male will have the red chromosome interacted with the blue part that I showed you earlier. So now from this zygote, when you have the blastocyst, every cell in the blastocyst will be heterozygous. And therefore, when it is, yeah, it will be heterozygous mutant mouse. Now, when you cross this heterozygous mutant mice through barrel sister mating, you will eventually gain the homozygous mutant mice, and that's how you will produce the knockout strain. Okay, so this is the how the knockout strains are developed. So far, like this slide is done slightly dated. So far, 11,000 genes have been knocked out in mice using this technology. Okay, so I just gave you the 101 of gene knockout technology in mouse, and in the next lecture we will talk about its implications and some very specific information about the protocol and the exact experimental technique. Today's job was just to give you a basic idea how genetically knockout mouse is developed, and how many other technologies that were developed before it contributed to the development of this technology. I hope that you were able to understand it, and I was clear enough, I hope so. If not, certainly you can raise those during the discussion hours. If you are following me in YouTube, you can certainly post questions in the YouTube channel. I will try my best to answer those things. Okay, thank you.